Hello again people, it's Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie. Basically today we're talking about machetes and basically the sort of observations I've made of them and what I think of them in general as a weapon. Now in terms of how it compares, I mean the too long didn't read short version is, in terms of compared with other tools, it's the best weapon amongst them. Compared with actual professional weapons, it's one of the worst, I'd say. But the long version would be that there are a few advantages and disadvantages for it. So firstly, in terms of advantages, I mean, they've not got too bad a balance. So I mean, with one of these, it's going to be more balanced as opposed to something weighty like a hammer or an axe or any of those kinds of things. And although it is a bit more forward weighted and more for heavy hacking than say a actual sword or something, I mean that does actually lend an advantage to it a bit because it delivers more power and force in a cut, but not so specialised that it becomes unwieldy. So you can still get a good bit of agility with these as well. Another advantage is a good bit of a blade all the way along, which means that, I mean, if you took another sort of tool item, like say a hand axe or something, obviously you're only going to do some real damage if you hit the specific part, the actual striking end. Same with various hammers and various other tools and things like that. Whereas with something like a machete, even though of course you're going to do the most impact and injury in a particular kind of section, in general you will still, even if you hit on somewhere like towards the handle, it's still going to do a fair bit of injury. And it makes it easier to do things like drawing cuts, so you could maybe hit on somewhere like towards the handle and draw out for a slicing motion, which is something you couldn't really do on a majority of tools. On a similar note to that, it's a smooth edge. So compared to something like a saw or something, rather than having serrations, even though some machetes have got serrated backs and bits like that, generally with the smooth edge you get on a machete, it's going to do better for things like draw cuts again, but also just not catch on things. Because if you've got things that curve around and hook and whatnot, it can have their advantages at times, but generally it's going to catch on something when you're going to want to do something like attack again from another side or get out of the way because they're trying to hit you too. Something with a serrated edge is just going to get caught and stuck everywhere. If it's a smooth edge, it's not going to do that. Simple as that. Yet still be very deadly and effective. Now in terms of things like the disadvantages, one of the first things is, apart from ones like this which I've modified to have a double edge, or another one here which I've got, which is the Cold Steel 24-inch Latin machete. Kudos to them, it's one of the best I could find actually. Generally you've only got, apart from, as I say, because I've modified this one, you generally just get a single edge. So you see various techniques and things in swordsmanship, like maybe if you bind a weapon down and strike up, or even if you start from a low position like down here in boar's tooth, then if you strike up, of what in Italian swordsmanship is called a sottani, as in sweeping up, or even from the other side sweeping up again, you can't really do that without a false edge. Whereas if you're using something like a machete, you basically have to, you might maybe strike once and you have to turn the blade, cut up again. It's only, I know it's only a part of a second, but that can mean the difference between life and death. That cut, turn, cut, even if it's just 1, 2, that is still not going to be as fast as 1, 2. Just using the false edge and cutting back up in that sort of flick motion, or even more of a sort of rabat kind of motion where you might deflect a sword and go in. Whereas if you're doing that with something like a false edge, we can't do that anymore with a machete. Now another point is, although again, this is a good example because this is a good quality machete for a weapon, because it's a 24-inch blade Latin machete, this one by Cold Steel. Generally, an actual machete you'd commonly find is more going to be of this length, which is somewhat short. You also have to get into more of a sort of a dagger range to actually use it, which is going to be a disadvantage, because if you're against anyone who's got a longer proper weapon, like a spear or a sword or any of those things, in a range they can hit you, you can't hit them. So you have to first distance in within their range before you can do anything in your range. But yet it's still a swinging weapon like a sword, even though, you know, with a short weapon it's going to be more ideal for thrusting. You know, like if you had a Roman gladius or something, or a Celtic sword, which can cut but can thrust, whereas this can't, which is my next point. With a machete, although again you might get special designs which have got tapered heads which are going to be useful for thrusting, ones like this, you're mostly going to find machetes which just have a cutting head, and that's going to be it. So in the close distance that machetes, as I mentioned, already get into usually, you want to try to do some kind of thrust, and you got this, well, this is what you commonly get, of a round bit that's not going to be very good for thrusting. You'd probably have to close in and do a draw cut or something like that. Whereas if you try any sort of thrust or half swording kind of thrust or any of those kinds of things, it doesn't apply to a machete, except if you really perhaps try hard enough and are lucky, which is not something you'd want to do in swordsmanship, rely on luck, then it's just going to fail miserably. And my third and last point of why I don't really find a machete a particularly good weapon is just simply the hilt. Because on something like, I'll give you an example, this is an arming sword. You've got this, which would be, of course, a standard cross guard. So you could do something like catch the sword directly on there. You could perhaps catch the sword on a blade, and if it slides down, there's no danger to your hands. But also you can even do things like, if you intentionally go into a bind, you can sort of go up and take the opponent's sword and do things like that, to intentionally slide and close in, and other such tactics and techniques like that. Whereas with a machete, none of that applies. And again, I mean, you've got even other examples, like here, which is a basket hilt mortuary sword. You could have something just really simple and basic, a sort of a plate or cup or something that covers over the hand and just protects it, even if you're not going to have fancy things like the inner cross guard doing slide and bind and wrap and do all those kinds of things, or even twist round and hit the pommel. You've got something that protects your hand, so you can extend the hand forward and not worry you're going to get your fingers chopped up. Whereas a machete, if I did something like this, or I'm going to stave you, then the opponent's just going to not bother closing all the way in to hit my head or my torso. He's going to chop my fingers off and try to drop the weapon. Oh dear, I surrender. And that is why, again, machetes compared to other tools and things are really great as weapons, and I can understand why certain people would use them. But in terms of compared to actual professional weapons like swords, they really don't compare. They're in a different sort of grade to them. So if you ever were in a situation where you were going to need to use a close combat weapon, God forbid, or wanted to consider general sparring and techniques and things like that just for practice and fun, then you're always going to find yourself in a disadvantage using a machete compared to using something like a sword. So yeah, tell me what you guys think, if you prefer machetes or not, or if actually, like me, you think machetes aren't that great. Thanks guys.